Okay, so let's say we've edited everything down and we are now preparing this session to get sent to another engineer. There's two things I want you to do before touching anything. The first is to save a copy of the edited version of your session. If you made a bunch of tweaks and you like them, let's make sure we always have a backup we can get back to. Save a copy, call it the name of your song, edited version, have it saved in the tuck just in case you need it. The second thing you want to do before preparing this thing for a bounce is contact the engineer you're going to work with and ask them how they want the files delivered. Some engineers want you to bounce what's called stems. Some engineers want you to just give them the session. If you're working in live, it's really awesome when an engineer just says, send me the session. It means you can go back and forth, and I'll show you how to do that. But I'll also show you how you can bounce the stems out of your session. And this way, no matter what the engineer is using, they'll be able to pull everything up. Let's assume we wanted to bounce stems so they can be loaded up into any DAW. It's pretty easy in live. First thing I would do is make sure that all of my tracks are named in a way that makes sense for the stems. So right now I have a vocal track. This narration track is just for you to hear me, so ignore that. And this one is actually still named Rummy and then a bit of the beat name. An engineer is not going to know what that means. So let's hit Command R and name that beat. And now I'm just going to go to File and Export Audio Video, or you can hit Command Shift R. That's really what I'd prefer to do. And now we have our export audio video window. And this is where you tell Live exactly what you want to bounce down. So if I go to selection, it says master. So if I leave it like it is, it's just going to bounce the master recording. If I'm just trying to play the track back at the end of the day, that's exactly what we would want. But we're trying to bounce the stems. We want each individual track so the engineer can mix and master accordingly. So for that, I'm going to go and switch this from master to all individual tracks. And now the beat, the vocal, and even the reverb that we use will get its own recording when we bounce everything down. You're going to leave most of these settings to off, but I do want to talk about this PCM section here. This is where we choose our file type. Most engineers that I've worked with either want a WAV file or an AIFF file. You can do either one in live. Leave dithering off when you're doing these bounces, and you don't need to encode an MP3 version of these bounces. Most mixing engineers aren't going to want any MP3 stems, so for those I will disable. That's a really useful feature if you're just bouncing a version to here and you want to send it to somebody. Like if you want to text somebody a version of your song, you can send them a little MP3. Now that we have all this set up, video is off, we're not bouncing any video here, we can just hit export, and I can choose where I want Ableton to deliver this bounce. I'm just going to put it on my desktop. Let's make a new folder. Let's call it bounce for mixing and hit save. Live rendered that audio. And if you look, we now have the name of the session appended to the beginning of each of the stems. So we've got our echo track. This is the reverb. We've got our beat track. This is the narration track. Again, you can ignore it. This is our vocal track, and this track here is actually the master bounce. So you get a full version of your bounce too. Now I can send this to an engineer. They can line these files up into Pro Tools, into Logic, into whatever they use to mix. And all of the stems are going to start from the beginning of the song and line up perfectly. Now, let's say we're working with an engineer that uses Ableton Live. This is, again, my preferred way to do things. You want to go to File, and you want to go to Collect All and Save. And this just makes sure that if you have recording bits or beats or pieces or samples that are located in other folders, it'll pull them all into the session that we're working in, right into that folder, so we can package it all together and send it off to an engineer. So I'm hitting OK to bring on all those pieces of audio. So to do this, we're going to go to File, we're going to go to Manage Files, and then we're going to go to Manage Project. And now this window opens up a couple of things. It makes sure that there's no missing files, talks about how many external files are in the project, yada yada. What we need to pay attention to is at the bottom, the section that says Create Pack. So I'm going to click there. And now, just like I did before, I'll go to that same folder we made. And let's just name this VPN session and hit save. And that's it. We created what's called an ALP file. This is Ableton Live's container file. that has the entire session and all of its audio. So now if your engineer also has live, they can go ahead and navigate to this file and pull it in, and it'll open up just like a session. As a final note, I would use the same process when you're backing up your sessions. I tend to do a bounce with all of the tracks stemmed out, just like I would for an engineer using a different DAW. And I also make an ALP file. I zip everything together and then I save it in two places. Hard drives at my crib and in the cloud. So I have backups that are saved digitally and I have backups that are saved on hard devices, just in case one or two of them fails. There's nothing worse than losing all of your work just because a hard drive failed. And media and storage is so cheap, there's no reason for you to deal with that anymore. Don't do it to yourself.